Human Geography, Chapter 2 and 3, Test Study Guide. This is a Population and Migration unit. You guys have a test coming up pretty soon, so let me talk about some of the key elements you guys have on your test. As you can see, this is the study guide. You've got 37 points that I'm going to test you guys on that you need to know or at least be familiar with in some degree. Remember, the more that you write on these, for each of these points, the better off you're going to be come test time. I'm going to talk about some of them, but also I kind of expect you guys to take some time to go and look in your book for some of this stuff, or look in your notes for some of them. For example, I might not spend too much time on population pyramids because you guys have done a project and everything. We've looked at that and really beat that one to the ground. So hopefully you guys have a firm understanding on things like that. But so let's take a look real quick at some of the key concepts of the Chapter 2/3 test that you guys have coming up in Human Geography. I'd like to start by saying that hopefully you guys are truly avid readers of the Human Geography textbook you guys have, and that you have read Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. I do kind of expect you guys to be reading these things on your own as we go through the material. If you look on page 47, there's a section that talks about population concentrations, and we looked at world distribution regionally and across space. And if you look on these pages, you can see the different areas of heavy population density that we looked at in the world. And there's a cartogram at the bottom that shows China and India based on their size relative to the size of people they have. That's what a cartogram does. The 4 most populated regions on Earth are listed there as the subheadings on page 47, going all the way to page 49. So number 1, East Asia. Number 2, South Asia. Number 3, Southeast Asia. Number 4, Europe. Then we also talked about places like megalopolis and all that, the regions in North America as one of the most densely populated regions on in the Western Hemisphere. I want you guys to not only know about the names of the 4 most populated regions, but also know a few of the countries there. Obviously, China and India and some of the countries in Europe and whatnot. Also, really important to know that when you look at Europe, European countries have huge population densities. There's a lot of people relative to the land, or I guess a lot of people to land ratio. Whereas in China, you've got high population density along the coast, but then inland regions, there's a lot more deserts and areas where it's not so easy to live. And so you have a lot less of a population density. Same for the United States. The eastern coast, you have a lot of people, but kind of in the whole middle of it, or the Midwest, except for the coast of California, the West, there's not a whole lot of people living there for all the land that there is. So make sure that you guys know European countries tend to have very high population densities. Alright, population pyramids, there's more on that subject, obviously, in the Dropbox folder. I've also, we've talked a lot about that, and I've showed you guys websites and stuff to talk about and show interactive population pyramids. But if you're interested in population pyramid in your book, you're going to find it on page 61. I do recommend you look at figure 2-19 in the Rubenstein book, because it does show different shapes of population pyramids based on, like, let's say whether it's a military base or whether it's a college town or whatnot. And I want to ask you guys to be able to identify some of the population pyramids based on those things. Alright? Life expectancy is simply a term that I'm asking you guys to be familiar with, and we all know that it's kind of the average age that you can expect to live based on current trends, but what are some of the things that go into determining a life expectancy is kind of how I'm going to approach you on the test. The human is a fancy way of talking about land that is livable to people. For example, if I ask you about a location like Sudan, we won't, well, I think I just said Sudan. I actually meant Algeria, but let's look at all of northern Africa and Libya too, and in Egypt. And what do you notice about that? Well, you've got the northern areas along the southern side of the Mediterranean Sea, but then what's just south of that? Well, it's a big physical landmark called the Sahara Desert. You can see here that almost the entire northern part, especially the part highlighted in a darker red, is nothing more than desert. It's very, very difficult to live in such a region. And there are your regional depictions of the Sahara Desert. So you see, very, very difficult to live in the Sahara Desert. This is not part of the Ecumen. It's part of a place where people cannot live. So the Ecumen is the locations on Earth that people can live in, and you can see this at the end of chapter 2. That word is defined in the Rubenstein book. I'm asking you about population density, another word that's easily defined by looking at the end of the chapter, but I'm also asking you to be able to compute this. So basically you're going to take the amount of people, the overall population of a country, divide it by the amount of land, whether it's square kilometers or square miles. Make sure that you're careful to look at what your measurement is, okay? So if I'm asking you about, square kilometers on the test, don't give me miles as the answer. Just be careful about what you put down. We're looking at distance decay. We talked about distance decay as when we were looking at in class in terms of migration, and people are far more likely to migrate to places that are closer by based on their perception of those places, but also based on the idea that it's just easier and you're more likely to travel to places closer by. And I give you guys the analogy that, if I'm trying to play disc golf and I'm throwing the disc at a basket that's really far away, what are the odds that I'm going to be able to put it exactly where I want it to go? Whereas if I'm throwing somewhere across my classroom, that's pretty easy. Actually, I could probably hit my target every time, because I can throw a disc, at least reasonably well. So, distance decay is actually addressed not in chapter 2 or 3, but actually in chapter 1. We discussed it because it's mentioned in the PowerPoints and everything. It is related to where people are going, or based on their perception of something closer as opposed to further away. Look on page 36 for a little bit more on distance decay. Push and pull factors. We spent a lot of time looking at push and pull factors. We even looked online and saw some videos that discuss push and pull factors. If you look at the PowerPoint, this is the PDF version of the PowerPoint because I couldn't load the actual PowerPoint itself onto my iPad. For some reason, it was crashing every single time I give it a try. But you got this section here we looked at about push and pull factors of migration. We spent a lot of time looking at that, and you can see the definition of push factors are conditions and perceptions to help the migrant decide to leave a place. So reasons that someone would want to leave would be something like political instability or environmental disasters all the time, like Hurricane Katrina or earthquakes in Japan, or maybe even if you're in an underdeveloped country, maybe earthquakes in somewhere like Haiti or tsunamis if you live in Sri Lanka. We looked at different types of push factors or things that go into people wanting to move. A little bit further down, you'll see pull factors, or I'm kind of assuming it's further down. It might be a little bit further up. Anyway, pull factors are the things that it works in the opposite way, or things that make you want to go to a place and live there. It'd be things like maybe better economic opportunities, or maybe the promotion of free speech, or civil liberties, or maybe a big city where if you're homosexual, you're more likely to fit in than if you're living in Podunkington, USA, in somewhere in the American South, in a small town. So you might go somewhere where they're more accepted. So these are examples of pull factors, and they can also be environmental or political or cultural, just like push factors. Basically, the two are opposites. All right, is a good way to look at it. Most of the time, if your push factors are related to political instability, or you're not making enough and you're poor, then pull factors are going to be places where you can make more money, or places where the government will protect you a little bit better. All right, looking a little bit further down, I got a guy's name, Paul Ehrlich. Paul Ehrlich. You could. I might have asked you guys to do an assignment where you Googled this guy. I really can't remember. I know that we talked a little bit about Thomas Malthus and his feelings towards overpopulation, and also the idea, or his theories, that the world is going to check itself eventually, and people are going to be competing for food, and you're going to see war and famine and disease and death and despair and gnashing of teeth. Basically, is what we were talking about here. But And you can argue both ways, as we have in class, that, his predictions have come true or his predictions have not come true. But there are still people today that believe that Thomas Malthus is ultimately going to be right and is going to be saying, told you so. One of those people is Paul Ehrlich, who writes a book called The Population Bomb, in which he he is a neo-Malthusian that gives a more modern take on Malthus's theories and applies it to our modern world. And at least if nothing else, stresses the importance of us trying to stay focused on how we can adjust or how we can prevent overpopulation from becoming such an issue that we're running out of resources or causing global warming issues as our population has doubled since 1950 or more. And he is one of the leading neo-Malthusians of our day. Wrote the book Population Bomb, in which he laid out his ideas. And again, you can argue that, well, we're not seeing the death, despair, war, famine, gnashing of teeth, but in some places like in Africa, there are people starving to death every single day. Even despite modern advances and things like that, we're just not getting enough food. We also looked at demography. Demography is defined in the book as well. It's more than just I want you guys to know more than just a study of population. So demography, according to dictionary.com, the science of vital social statistics as of births, deaths, diseases, marriages, etc. of populations. I'll give you an even simpler, more narrowed down version of what demography is than that. The scientific study of population characteristics. This is how it's defined in your book on page 75. That's a straight up definition of demography, but I do want you guys to know a little bit more about what it's composed of, such as the different types of statistics mentioned on dictionary.com, which frankly I can't pull up right now because the browser within my software here was beginning to really screw up pretty bad. And there's the actual definition written out, so you guys can see it. I'm just still trying to learn how to use this stuff. I know my twisty, weird format here probably makes most of y'all cringe, especially if you have OCD issues of any kind. But we looked at demography, natural increase rate. NIR you'll see in the defined on the back of page 75. You'll also see a little bit more about that in the book. I'm not going to ask you a whole lot of things about that. I do want you to know, however, the formula for measuring natural increase rate, because I am going to ask you to actually compute that. So you're looking at the birth rate minus the death rate, and honestly, that's probably enough for me. There's more to it, but remember the birth rate minus the death rate. If there's any more that I want you guys to know for that, then I will let you know in class, privately. Migration. We talked about the whole chapter 3 is dealing with migration, and it is a permanent settlement of someone. It's a form of relocation, diffusion, when groups of people will move to permanent settlement somewhere else. We also talked a little bit about it in the notes PowerPoint. We looked at specific types of. That's not it. Just bear with me a second. We looked at different types of migration. And we'll get back to the laws of migration in a second because we need to know about Ravenstein. But let's see. What is migration? We've got. I wanted you guys to know about cyclic, periodic, and or cyclic and periodic movement as different forms of movement as well. In addition to actually looking at migration itself. I want you to be familiar with what activity space is, kind of like the day-to-day movement. Like, for example, my activity space going back and forth Midland Valley would be the drive back and forth through Aiken, so all that would be my activity space. A commute, for example. Even seasonal movement can be considered activity space. Today I had my family reunion in Georgia, and so I drove down to see them. We do this every year on the first Sunday of November, and so that could be an example of seasonal movement as well as nomadism also, or different types of nomadism. The two different types of immigration are pretty self-explanatory. E-immigration, is the type of migration in which people are moving out. It's kind of like outbound or outward migration. Immigration, obviously, you got people coming into a country from another country, and so, I know it's kind of confusing the way it's worked out. You can see those in your book. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time looking at that. It's also listed out in the PowerPoint. We are going to look at forced migration, though, as cultural reasons for why people are strongly persuaded to move from place to place, to the point of they feel like they're in danger or they're so persecuted against. Not only is that a type of forced migration, but forced migration can be if someone's I'm going to go ahead and say that environmental issues can cause people to move. But most of the time we're looking at either cultural or even political situations where people are forced to move. But even those political situations oftentimes are because of cultural differences, like ethnic differences, or people that are refugees due to maybe genocides or things like that. We talked about a lot of situations where people would leave in Africa because of the Sudan civil war that resulted in two countries. And also, you got tons of refugees in the Syria region because of Syrian civil war that's causes people to leave on a forced migration kind of basis. I'd like to take right now to apologize to everyone for how stuffy I am. I'm having a hard time enunciating because I can't breathe through my nose at all. Anyway, so we're looking at forced migration. Voluntary migration is the opposite of that. It's exactly as it sounds. People decide they're going to move, and they move because they have the means to do it, and because they want to, for whatever reason it is they're moving. It's pretty self-explanatory. Chain migration is, I don't even know exactly where it is in your book, but it's a special type of migration. I went on ask.com, and what it gives here is pretty good. A chain migration is a series of migrations within a family. Chain migration begins with one family member who sends money to bring other family members to a new location. All right, so in doing so, it is kind of like a chain effect. And so, well, I mean, simply put, that's. Actually, I just lied to you. I said that I didn't know where chain migration is in the book. I was easily able to find it. It's a bold vocabulary word. Look on page 90. You'll see a lot more about chain migration. I recommend you guys take a look at that. Moving on. When you look up megalopolis, you'll see that it is an urban region, especially one consisting of several large cities and suburbs that adjoin one another. But there's a little bit more to that I want you to know than just that general definition. There's this particular region that is known as megalopolis in the United States. Megalopolis, more specifically, is that region right there of the United States of America. If you want more reference than that, look on page 426 in your book, figure 1321. I know we have not done chapter 13, but we did talk about megalopolis as one of the densest regions in the United States and also in the Western Hemisphere. Megalopolis is the region basically extending from Boston to Washington, D.C., from Boston in the northeast to Washington, D.C., a little bit further southwest. That's what the boundaries basically are for megalopolis. It's like almost continual, nothing but city and urbanization, kind of built into one big megacity. That's what megalopolis is. Now, getting about halfway there, there's a few things like physiologic density and agricultural density, which I'm basically just asking you about the definitions there. We're not going to look at that since those are things you can look up very easily in the Rubinstein book. But women and LDCs is something that I do want to talk about just briefly with you. You can see just by looking at a few of these pictures here on a simple Google search that many of the women here are with large families. Why is that? Well, women in less developed countries tend to have less access to things like contraceptive, less rights than men. They're considered less than men, and so not given the same rights to say no to having children, for example. They have less education in third world countries or in developing countries, and so women are that much more unlikely to understand the dangers of having such large amounts of kids in their family, and are more likely to get pregnant time and time again and have maybe 3 or 4 babies and that they maybe can't even take care of. And so it puts them in a position due to all these different things that make up the LDC in the first place. Most LDCs have, or I guess one of the characteristics of a lesser developed country is lack of education, a lack of women's rights, things like this that might, or extreme poverty, things like this that help to, I guess, make women more likely to get pregnant in the first place. It's kind of this big circle, but anyway, that's what I want you guys to think about when we're looking at what is it we're looking at? Women in LTCs, they're more likely to have more kids because of things like poverty, because of things like lack of education, lack of contraceptives, all that good stuff. Is basically what I want you guys to know.
Okay, well, so you get, I just made the last half of this video and lost it, so hopefully I'll be able to do as good of a job as I had been doing. But I left off at number 21. We were looking at the total fertility rate, and basically, I'm not going to ask you anything other than what it already says in the back of chapter 2. So just know this: basically the rate of which basically the average number of children that a woman is going to have in her fecund or childbearing years. You should be fine on that question. I don't believe I'm going to ask you anything more than that. So do know the total fertility rate is abbreviated TFR if you're looking at it from a data statistical standpoint. For guest workers, I do want you guys to refer to a page number for that. And that is in chapter 3. We looked at a section actually about guest workers and brain drain. We talked about it in class. It's on page 93. We're going to look at guest workers. 92 is brain drain. First, let's take a look at guest workers. We talked about these guys as temporary migrant workers that move from a developing country to a more developed country in search of economic gain. These guys are trying to get better jobs. When they get those jobs, they're going to send remittances, that is number 24, that is money. They're going to send money earned back home to their family they're leaving behind. What is it about these guest workers? Well, they're working in lower, I guess, jobs in society, also probably lower paying jobs in the country in which they're moving to. However, they're getting paid more than they would if they were living in a city or working in a city in their own country. So it's kind of a win for them in that they get to send money back, and typically this is more money than they would have made. And we look at examples of women from Mexico that would do these kinds of things, and we also look at examples of people from Northern Africa that would hook up in this kind of work with European countries. Now, what's the downside of this? Well, first of all, they're not very highly looked upon in societies in the countries and where they are going. Even though they're wanted by those governments to fill jobs that are less likely to be filled by natives or people that live in more developed countries because of the type of work it is, or also because people that are living in stage 3 and 4 countries demand higher wages than these guest workers would. They tend to be looked down upon by the people that live in the countries where the guest workers are migrating to, stage 3 and 4 countries. Aside from that, they are also leaving their families behind. Some of them are separated for years, and that can rip families apart. And we looked especially at a case in Mexico where this young boy was left behind with grandparents that really didn't look out for him very much, while his mom went and worked as a nanny for rich Americans and sent money back. The money that's sent back is called a remittance. So it's kind of rough work for guest workers to be separated in such ways, and also deal with the racial and the racial prejudice or the ethnic prejudice that people have towards them in countries where they are migrating. Brain drain is kind of a concept that's I wouldn't say it's opposite of guest workers, but guest workers kind of looked down upon in society, where brain drain is kind of a cool concept. We like to take people's smartest and most capable workers, and to make a little bit more sense, Let's look at India, for example, who sends many of their people to American universities to get American educations, and then maybe come back and be doctors or lawyers or specialists or scientists or whatever it might be. But a lot of times, and I went to school with a lot of these people. I had some Buddhist friends. These guys were smart as they could be. Some of them are engineers. Some of them are doctors. What happens is oftentimes these people will move to the United States, get their education, and then they'll stay in these developed countries so that they can make better use of their skills in these specialized fields. If people from India come to the United States to get American education, but then don't go back to India, we have essentially sucked some of their most prized, if you will, natives, some of the people with the best abilities and the most potential to succeed in those countries. Now they're ours. We kind of like that. We like to have more specialized, or people that are worth more, especially in terms of migration. So you see a lot of these individuals become college professors. A lot of them become engineers or scientists, or you name it. Some of these specialized work. We see a lot of these types of people, this brain drain phenomenon, in all kinds of developed countries, coming from places in Asia or other developed countries. And so that's kind of the concept of brain drain. You're looking for more information on brain drain and guesswork design, page 92 and 93 of the Rubenstein book. On to the second agricultural revolution. I don't want you guys to be able to, not necessarily tell me about the second agricultural revolution as a movement, but rather I'm specifically asking you, how did it affect population growth? All right? I'm looking for basically the following. What happens is the second agricultural revolution is the time when people started to basically substantially increase the amount of yields that food was able to provide. So if they're farming a set number of fields, all of a sudden, because of scientific advances and agricultural advances and things like this, people start doing differently. They are able to produce substantially more food on the same field that used to produce less food. Farmers in Great Britain were the first ones to kind of spearhead this movement with their enclosures, where they had these massive farms that were basically a compilation of large farms and smaller farms that these guys bought from small-time farmers that lost business to the rich guys. So now what you see is less land was able to produce more food with less work. Therefore, all of your farmers that were out of business, the ones that didn't go to like the United States and try to sell the West, looking for more farmland, ended up becoming the labor force for the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution itself didn't cause population growth. Extra food, allowing people to live longer, caused population growth that actually became their workforce for the Industrial Revolution. So the Industrial Revolution arguably wouldn't have happened if agricultural production hadn't increased to provide more food for a larger growing population. Stage 2 countries, which is what Britain was during the time of the agricultural or the Industrial Revolution, stage 2 countries are gaining population not because of medicines or anything like that or technology, as much as the increase of food that allows for people to live longer. That's the key to that first initial group of first initial spike of the natural increase rate. Looking at number 26, Ravenstein was a individual who came up with or developed laws that describe the migration patterns of migrants all over the world. And we're going to look at his, specifically his laws. They're in Key Issue 1 of Chapter 3, starting on page 81. You see where it says, why do people migrate? Key Issue 1. Well, underneath the little subheadings here, it mentions reasons for migrating. It's got 2 little bullets. Those are the first 2 of the laws of Ravenstein's laws of migration. And they mention a little bit about E.G. Ravenstein right there at the top of for the intro for the key issue. Most people migrate for economic reasons. We mentioned that time and time again in class. Overwhelmingly, the people that are moving from one place to another are doing it for better jobs. Cultural and environmental factors also induce migration, although not as frequently as economic factors. So those are two very, very important reasons for movement that we talked about in class. Once you go a little bit further, on page 84, you see where it mentions the distance of migration. And again, they mention two more of Ravenstein's theories. Most migrants relocate a short distance away and remain in the same country. Distance decay becomes a factor when you look at migration, because the further away something is, the less likely someone is to go to it. Also, long-distance migrants to other countries head for major centers of economic activity. The gravity model. The larger urban centers are kind of a magnet that suck in migrants. It makes sense when you really think about it. Most people on the other side of the globe aren't familiar with Aiken, South Carolina. They're familiar with New York City or Atlanta or Chicago or large urban areas, which is the reason why those places attract more migrants. Look a little bit further down, number 27, 28, child mortality and infant mortality. I'm not going to ask you guys anything else other than to be able to differentiate between them based on the definition in the back of chapter 2. So make sure that you guys look at that and know the difference between child and infant mortality rates. Now, Wilbur Zielinski and the migration transition. We're going to spend a little bit more time looking at this fellow. In particular, I left a little note here saying how migration occurs in each stage, and I'm telling you, you want to be specific. So we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at Wilbur Zielinski on this review video. So Wilbur Zielinski is the person who kind of applied the demographic transition to stages of migration, and this is called the migration transition, as you can see at the bottom of page 84 in your textbook. You're going to want to look where it says international migration and read that section. I promise you, it's going to behoove you to do so. Let's look at one by one. A stage 1 country is characterized mainly by seasonal mobility in search of food. We're looking at basically nomadism. All right, hunter and gatherers. These are the types of people, or even pastoralists or so on, that were engaged in, excuse me, in basically they were moving around place to place looking for food, coming back, making circles, whatever you want to call it. This is stage 1. No country today is in stage 1. So most of what we're going to see in the world today is going to be, I guess all of what we're going to see in the world today, well, not really, is because there are still pastoralists living in Asia and in Africa. But we're going to see stage 2 through 3. So let's look at the second and third bullets in the middle of page 84. Stage 2 country is characterized by people moving from rural farming communities to urban centers in stage 2 countries. That's internal migration, all right, in stage 2 countries. External or international migration in stage 2 countries is characterized, according to Mr. Zielinski, by people in rural areas in stage 2 countries moving to urban centers in stage 3 and 4 countries. Okay, like guest workers today. So those are the different types of migration patterns you will see in stage 2 countries. People moving within the country from rural to urban, or people moving from rural areas in the country to urban areas in another country altogether, normally a stage 3 or 4 country. Now, stage 3 and 4, internal migration, these are the destination areas of people from stage 2 countries. And it mentions that in the book. It says they are the principal destinations of international migrants leaving stage 2 countries. Internal migration in stage 3 and 4 countries are almost always from urban to suburban. Okay? Kind of like, today middle class makes up most of the developed world's suburbia. However, in the right after industrialization, poor people lived in cities to work in the factories. More rich people could afford the commute to live out in suburban areas. So suburbs originally began as places for rich people to live. And you still see this movement from urban to suburban as internal migration in stage 3 and 4 countries. There is, ironically and strangely enough, a recent trend because of gentrification or whatnot that we're going to look at in urban geography, where super rich people will move towards the city center in what might have been an old factory building that they've renovated and created into state-of-the-art condos or something of the like. But this is more of a recent trend. You're not going to see that nearly as much as you would see the urban to suburban shift in population. All right. So moving on. That's just about all we need to know about Wilbur-Zielinski and his migration transition. Again, you're going to read 84 and 85. Just page 84 at the bottom. Let's look at doubling time. Okay, so I wanted to mention doubling time because I got a little bit ahead of myself. Doubling time is a term you're going to see at the back of chapter 2. There's not a whole lot to ask about doubling time. It's just the amount of time it takes for a population to double itself, and this differentiates between in terms of scale as well as in terms of the time period. There are some people that have seen the world's population, for example, double twice that lived in the 1900s. Moving on, let's look at the trends of population growth throughout time. This is actually quite simple. What I'm asking you specifically is well, if you look way back to 2 to 5 million years ago, old Stone Age, monkey man, well, I don't know, whatever you want to say. Actually, earliest Homo sapiens were probably living about that time, according to science. If you're looking for the creation of Adam and Eve and all that kind of stuff, most people who are religious scholars date that to about maybe around 7,000 BC. To be honest with you, I'm not really 100% sure. Nonetheless, no matter what your beliefs about the peopling of the earth, we're going to look at how probably from around 7,000, 6,000 BC, when people began to be people and act and communicate, caveman, not even caveman, I'm not looking at Neanderthals, but you get the point. People were hunter-gatherers at first, living in hunter-gatherer communities, and this is well before agriculture. Population didn't increase very much, but you can see this very gradual, steady increase in population. And really, if we look at the numbers here in terms of billions of people, you have, I mean, I'm not even sure exactly when the population hit 1 million, but it didn't hit 1 billion until, well, probably the first few years after the Industrial Revolution is going to take hold. You can see, though, that from 1 AD going into about around the I guess 1000s or 1500s, I'm guessing here, population did seem to increase a little bit more. Basically, if I asked you a question, tell me about the trends of population growth over time up to about the year 1800 at the time of the Industrial Revolution, it was a very gradual, slow growth over a huge amount of time. However, after the 1800s, after the Industrial Revolution, you see this massive spike of exponential population growth. And you guys have seen this many times, right? That is how you characterize the trends of population growth over time. I'm going to definitely ask you guys a question, which you're expected to be able to understand that concept. There's another map that I could show you that, we'll take a look at. This map here shows you the world population from 1750 until it actually projects the future into 2050, excuse me. And around the year 1800 is, according to this map, when we reached the 1 billion threshold. So very gradual growth up until that point, but then you can see that fairly quickly into it we started to rise to the point that by 1950 the world population is around 3 million. We have literally doubled the world's population at the point that, by the time I was in college in around 2002, 2003, and then busted on up past that, and by 2050 we are actually that's some pretty serious projections there. Most projections I've seen put us at about 10 billion around 2100. So it's all trends. It's all based on current trends. That's why a population projection is. But nonetheless, something we should be concerned about. I would say most certainly. Population trends in LDCs. What I'm looking at here is that in less developed countries, population tends to grow exponentially, as can be seen by the chart we were just looking at. The blue, greenish color, whatever you want to call that, teal, represents developing countries. In other words, LDCs. You can see that population is growing and has grown substantially more over time in those countries, whereas population trends in more developed countries tend to grow very slower, more gradual scale. Even though there is growth, it's not nearly as intense as the growth of LDCs. Negative consequences of a growing middle class. We spent a little bit of time looking at this in an article and talking about how the more people are in the middle class, the higher my gas goes, the more money I spend on things that I take for granted now. And I like to take for granted the material wealth that I'm able to partake in due to my elevated world status. To be middle class in the United States is actually to be pretty wealthy in terms of the world. Nonetheless, the more people enter the middle class, yay, that's great. Everybody's rich and everybody gets to play me at Call of Duty and things like that. But the problem here is that we're all sharing a very limited set of resources that we need in order to live our lifestyle. And if we're not able to make electric cars or make beaming technology like Star Trek, just beam you from here to there, or anything else that we've talked about that I wish existed in the sci-fi world, we're going to be competing for things as simple as gasoline, for things as simple as money to be made, for things as simple as water to be drank from aquifers, because we're taking away our clean water source and supplies. We need to develop science and technology to help us as we embark on the process of population growth, in particular adding people to the middle class. We want more people to succeed across space. I'm telling you, I really do. But I don't want to have to share my stuff with them, and that's what we're looking at in the near future, especially as China and Mexico and India and other countries spend or are taking millions of people a year out of the poor classes and into the middle class that you and I love so dearly. Thomas Malthus, there's a lot on him in your book. He is an economist that believed that eventually we're going to kill ourselves with overpopulation issues. I told you guys during this whole unit I was reading the book by Dan Brown, The Inferno. Loved every second of it because I love those books. But really, in all honesty, I'm telling you what, if that book don't make you a neo-Malthusian, I don't know what it does, because it does do a pretty good job at bringing to light some serious issues of too many people on Earth. And Thomas Malthus believed that we were going to have checks in place on our population because of things like there would be too little food, we'd fight over resources, we'd fight over food, we'd die of starvation and disease because not enough food was around to sustain growing population. And eventually, the population was going to be hard stopped because of these disasters. It hasn't happened yet on a global scale, but it does happen every day in Africa. It does happen every day in some other poor countries where there's not political stability or not enough food going around. Or look at the stunted generation of North Korea. So there are places where Thomas Malthus' projections or projected future are taking place today. But in the United States, it's really not happening. In Europe, it's really not happening. In other parts of the world, Thomas Malthus has been proven wrong. But there are still people like Mr. Paul Ehrlich here, number 8, we talked about earlier, that still believes that this could happen to us. And you know, I wouldn't count it out. We just got to make sure we are able to prepare and keep up with the times in terms of our technology and our food production and come up with new ways. If not, we need to come up with a way to, well, dare I say it, force people to have less kids. When and why did the world enter stage 2? We've already talked about this. And if you look here at this nice little chart that I left up, about 1750 to 1800, somewhere in that little category is when we can say that the world entered stage 2, or that some countries began to enter stage 2 in the world. And the reason it happened is because of agricultural production allowed for larger populations to live longer because they weren't starved, they had more food, they were healthier people. Then industrialization began to occur, and when countries became more industrialized, things like medical or technology and medical advances began to happen. Better lifestyles, better living choices, less pollution, things like this is going to enter, or it's going to cause countries to enter into a stage 3. So there we go. We've covered every conceivable thing that could be on your upcoming test on population and migration. It's going to be about 40 questions, multiple choice. It's going to be one question that I'm going to ask you to answer that is free response. 100% of every bit of it we just covered in this review. So if you listen to it again, take notes on the video or whatever you want to do or whatever you need to do, that will help you prepare. You know how to contact me if you need anything. Thank you very much. Hope you guys all have a spectacular week.